Chapter 7. This chapter is devoted to the question of that spiritual discernment by means of which the Supreme Spirit can be discerned in all things, and the absence of which causes a delusion constantly recurring, the producer of sorrow. Krishna says that this sort of knowledge leaves nothing else to be known, but that to attain it the heart, that is, every part of the nature, must be fixed on the spirit. Meditation has to be constant, and the spirit made the refuge, or abiding place. He then goes on to show that to have attained to such a height is to be a Mahatma. Among thousands of mortals, a single one, perhaps, strives for perfection, and among those so striving, perhaps a single one knows me as I am. This points out the difficulty to be met in any one life, but is not cause for discouragement. It simply makes clear the fact, and thus also punctures the boastful claims of those who would pretend to have reached perfection, but do not show it in their acts. He then gives an eightfold division of his inferior nature, or that part of the universal one which can be known. This is not the nature of man and does not oppose the theosophical sevenfold system of human principles. No particular theosophical classification for the divisions of nature has been given out. It would, on the one hand, not be understood, and on the other, disputes leading to no good end would follow. He might as well have stated the 25-fold division held by some other school. This, quote, inferior nature, unquote, is only so relatively. It is the phenomenal and transient which disappears into the superior at the end of a kalpa. It is that part of God, or of the self, which chose to assume the phenomenal and transient position, but is, in essence, as great as the superior nature. The inferiority is only relative. As soon as objective material and subjective spiritual worlds appear, the first named has to be denominated inferior to the other, because the spiritual being the permanent base, it is in that sense superior. But as an absolute whole, all is equal. Included in the inferior nature are all the visible, tangible, invisible, and intangible worlds. It is what we call nature. The invisible and intangible are nonetheless actual. We know that poisonous gas, though invisible and intangible, is fatally actual and potential. Experiment and induction will confer a great deal of knowledge about the inferior nature of God, and along that path the science of the modern West is treading. But before knowing the occult, hidden, intangible realms and forces, often called spiritual, but not so in fact, the inner astral senses and powers have to be developed and used. This development is not to be forced, as one would construct a machine for performing some operation, but will come in its own time, as all our senses and powers have come. It is true that a good many are trying to force the process, but at last they will discover that human evolution is universal and not particular. One man cannot go very far beyond his race before the time. Krishna points out to Arjuna a gulf between the inferior and the superior. This latter is the knower and that which sustains the whole universe, and from it the inferior nature springs. So the materialistic and scientific investigator, the mere alchemist, the man who dives into the occult moved by the desire for gain to himself, will none of them be able to cross the gulf at all, because they do not admit the indwelling spirit, the knower. The superior nature can be known because it is in fact the knower who resides in every human being who has not degraded himself utterly. But this must be admitted before any approach to the light can be made. And but few are really willing, and many are unable to admit the universal character of the self. They sometimes think they do so by admitting the self as present, as contiguous, as perhaps part-tenant. This is not the admission. It leaves them still separate from the self. All the phenomenal appearances, all the different names and lives and innumerable beings are hung suspended, so to say, on the self. Thus, and all things hang on me as precious gems upon a string. A number of preeminently great and precious things and powers are here enumerated and declared to be the self, while next the very delusions and imperfections of life and man are included. Nothing is left out. This is certainly better than an illogical religion which separates God from the delusions and cruelties of nature, and then invents a third thing in the person of a devil, who is the source of human wickedness. All this further accentuates the difficulties in the way. Krishna says the illusion is difficult to surmount, but that success can be attained by taking refuge in the self, for he is the self. The entire congregation of worshippers who are righteous find favor with the self, but those who are spiritually wise are on the path that leads to the highest, which is the self. This means, as Krishna says, that those who with the eye of spiritual wisdom see that the self is all, begin to reincarnate with that belief ingrained in them. Hitherto they had come back to earth without that single idea, but possessed of many desires and of ideas which separated them from the self. Now they begin to return fully at rest in the self and working out their long-accumulated karma, and at last they become what was mentioned in the opening verses, a Mahatma, or great soul. There is, however, a large number of persons who are in the class which has been deprived of spiritual discernment through diversity of desires, or who have not yet had discernment for the same reason. The verse reads as follows: Those who through diversity of desires are deprived of spiritual wisdom adopt particular rites subordinated to their own natures and worship other gods. Although these words, like the rest of the Kalaki, were spoken in India and to a Hindu, they are thoroughly applicable in the West. Every mode of thought and of living may be called a rite gone over by each one as his conscious or unconscious religion. A man adopts that which is conformable or subordinate to his own nature, and being full of desires he worships or follows other gods than the Supreme Self. In India the words would more particularly mean the worship, which is quite common, of idols among those who are not educated out of idolatry, but they would also mean what is said above. In the West these other gods are the various pleasures, objects, aims, and modes of life and thought, be they religious or not, which the people adopt. They have not the many thousands of gods of the Hindu pantheon, each one for some particular purpose, but it comes to the same thing. The idol worshipper bows to the god visible, so that he may attain the object of his heart, which that god is supposed to control. The Western man worships his objects and strives after it with all his heart and mind, and thus worships something else than the supreme imperishable one. The god of one is political advancement, of another, and generally of most, the possession of great wealth. One great god is that of social advancement, the most foolish, hollow, and unsatisfactory of all, and with it in America is yoked the god of money, for without wealth there is no social preeminence possible except in those cases where official position confers a temporary glory. The mother often spends sleepless nights inventing means for pushing her daughter into social success. The father lies wakefully calculating new problems for the production of money. The inheritors of riches bask in the radiance coming from their own gold, while they strive for new ways to make, if possible, another upward step on that road founded on ashes and ending at the grave, which is called social greatness. And out of all this striving, many and various desires spring up, so that their multiplicity and diversity completely hide and obstruct all spiritual development and discernment. But many who are not so carried away by these follies attend to some religion which they have adopted or been educated into. In very few cases, however, is the religion adopted. It is born with the child, it is found with the family, and is regularly fastened on as a garment. If in this religion or cult there is faith, then the Supreme Self, impartial and charitable, makes the faith strong and constant, so that thereby objects are attained. In whatever way the devotee chooses to worship with faith, it is the Supreme which, though ignored, brings about the results of faith. A curious speculation rises here. It may be true, it may be not. It can be noticed that millions of prayers are recited every month addressed to the one God all through Christendom, asking various favors. Millions were offered for the conversion to a better life of the Prince of Wales. They failed. The rain ceases and prayers are made, but the dryness continues. Candles are lighted and prayers said to stop the earthquake which is destroying the city. The quakings go on until the impulse is ended and the city ruined. It is perfectly impossible to prove answers to prayers in enough cases to convince the thoughtful. Now the speculative thought is that perhaps the prayers offered to an unmanifested God have no effect, for to be effectual the being appealed to must have a separate existence, so as to be able to intervene in separated manifested things. Christians do not possess the statistics of results from prayer offered to gods in Oriental countries. The usual cases brought forward in the West are such as the orphan asylum, for which nothing is asked except in prayer. But in India they have institutions similarly, but not so lavishly, supported, and no asking alone save to the particular patron god. It is a matter of strong, constant faith, which carries the thoughts of the prayer into the receptive minds of other people, who are then moved by the subconscious injected thought to answer the request. Now if the prayer is offered to an unseen and unknown God, the faith of the person is not firm, whereas perhaps in the case of the idol worshipper or of the Roman Catholic addressing himself to the Mother of God, with her image before him, the very presence of their representative is an aid to constancy in faith. All this applies of course to prayers for personal and selfish ends, but that prayer or aspiration which is for spiritual light and wisdom is the highest of all, no matter to whom or what addressed. All religions teach that sort of prayer. All others are selfish and spiritually useless. Although the strength of a devotee's devotion and faith for any god or object is due entirely to the Supreme Self, no matter if the faith be foolish and the god false, yet the reward obtained is said to be temporary, transitory, sure to come to an end. But unlike Western religious systems, this is declared to be a matter of law instead of being determined by sentiment or arbitrarily. The sentences in which I find this are as follows. But the reward of such short-sighted man is temporary. Those who worship the gods go to the gods, and those who worship me come to me. Man, made of thought, occupant only of many bodies from time to time, is eternally thinking. His chains are through thought, his release due to nothing else. His mind is immediately tinted or altered by whatever object it is directed to. By this means the soul is enmeshed in the same thought or series of thoughts as is the mind. If the object be anything that is distinct from the Supreme Self, then the mind is at once turned into that, becomes that, is tinted like that. This is one of the natural capacities of the mind. It is naturally clear and uncolored, as we would see if we were able to find one that had not gone through too many experiences. It is movable and quick, having a disposition to bound from one point to another. Several words would describe it. Chameleon-like, it changes color. Sponge-like, it absorbs that to which it is applied. Sieve-like, it at once loses its former color and shape the moment a different object is taken up. Thus, full of joy from an appropriate cause, it may suddenly become gloomy or morose upon the approach of that which is sorrowful or gloomy. We can therefore say it becomes that to which it is devoted. Now, the gods here represent not only the idols of idol worshippers, but all the objects and desires people run after. For the idols are but the representatives of the desired object. But all these gods are transitory. If we admit the existence of Indra or any other god, even he is impermanent. Elsewhere it is said that all the gods are subject to the law of death and rebirth. At the time of the great dissolution they disappear. The vain things which men fix their minds on and run after are of the most illusory and transitory character. So whether it be the imaginary gods or the desires and objects the mind is fixed on, it, that is, those who thus act, has only a temporary reward, because the object taken is in itself temporary. This is law and not sentiment. Pushing into details a little further, it is said that after death the person, compelled thereto by the thoughts of life, becomes fixed in this, that, or the other object or state. That is why the intermediate condition of Kamaloka is a necessity. In that state they become what they thought. They were bigots and tortured others. Those thoughts give them torture. Internal fires consume them until they are purified. The varieties of their different conditions and appearances are as vast in number as are all the immense varieties of thoughts. I could not describe them. But those who worship or believe in the self as an all-in-all, not separate from any, supreme, the container, the whole, go to it, and becoming it, know all because of its knowledge, and cease to be subject to change because it is changeless. This also is law and not sentiment. The chapter concludes by showing how the ignorant who believe in a supreme being with a form fall into error and darkness at the time of their birth because of the hold which former life recollections have upon the mind. This includes the power of the skandhas, or aggregates of sensations and desires accumulated in prior lives. At birth, these, being a natural part of us, rush to us and we to them, so that a new union is made for another lifetime. In the other life, not having viewed the self as all in all, and having worshipped many gods, the sensations of liking and disliking are so strong that the darkness of rebirth is irresistible. But the wise man died out of his former life with a full knowledge of the self at the hour of death, and thus prevented the imprinting upon his nature of a set of sensations and desires that would otherwise, upon reincarnation, lead him into error. This is the chapter on unity, teaching that the self is all, or if you like the word better, God, that God is all and not outside of nature, and that we must recognize this great unity of all things and beings in the self. It and the next chapter are on the same subject and are only divided by a question put by Arjuna.